It was raining the way it always does in Portland in November, slow and cold and a little insulting. I remember thinking the weather was still kinder than my family. It was Veterans Day my day, the one day I thought I would not have to earn a chair at my own parents' table. I wore my old military jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of storage and bus rides and discipline, and I carried 2 warm apple pies and a small wrapped toy for my nephew. On the drive over, I rehearsed something light. I thought I would walk in, kiss Mom, tell Dad I made it, let Jason crack one of his big brother jokes. I even parked on the street instead of the driveway because I did not want to look like I was taking up space. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw through the front window, and that was the first sting. The dining room was lit, the good plates were out, the tablecloth Mom only used on holidays, the little flag centerpiece she bought for Memorial Day and kept using all of it was there. I saw a chair with a small card on it. For a second I smiled because I thought finally someone remembered. Then I read it. Reserved. Under it was written in my mother's handwriting, Jason Promotion. I was the one who sent Jason the job posting 3 months earlier. I stood there with rain dripping off my hood while they celebrated him. Not the veteran, not the daughter who wired thousands when Dad got sick, the golden son. I knocked anyway. I still wanted to believe. Jason opened the door just a little enough for him to block it with his shoulder. He looked surprised, but it was the performative kind, not the real kind. He said, "OM did not expect you. We are having a family dinner." He stressed family like a warning. I could smell roasted chicken, cinnamon, Mom's red wine. I could hear laughter behind him, chair legs, the clink of glasses. I tilted my head so I could see inside. Mom saw me in the hallway mirror. She turned her face away like she was checking the oven. I said I thought since it was Veterans Day. Jason cut in, "Yeah, about that. Mom was not sure you were coming, so we only cooked enough for the guests." Guests? I heard that word louder than the rain. I felt the heat start in my throat, but I swallowed it. I smiled because that is what you do when you are the responsible one. You make it easy for everybody. I said guests. You mean family. Jason laughed. The kind of laugh people do when they want everyone in the house to know the joke is you. Behind him, I heard someone whisper, "She really showed up." I shifted the pies in my arms. They were starting to cool. I said, "It is fine. I just thought because I wore the jacket and all." Mom finally spoke from inside. "Honey, you should have called first. You know how small the roast is." Her voice was smooth, practiced the voice she used with church friends. I looked past Jason again. On the wall above the table was a banner. "Congratulations, Jason," on Veterans Day. I stepped back off the porch. My boots splashed the water that dripped from the hanging fern Mom bought this summer. I said, "Right, I get it. Have a good dinner. Tell the boys I said hi." I started walking to the car, trying to hold the pies steady. That was when it got stupid. I slipped on the wet step, and one of the pies slid out of the tin and landed face down on the porch. Jason snorted. Behind him, someone actually giggled. I was half bent over, trying to scoop crust back into the pan, when he called after me, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Hey, Em, do not forget. Mom's Wi-Fi is still under your name. Can you pay it for 1 more month? The kids are streaming tonight." The door was still open, so everyone heard. I straightened up slow. My jacket was wet. My hands were sticky with apple filling. My heart was doing that slow, cold ache. That was the moment I felt something shift. I had been the girl who paid medical co-pays, who fixed tires, who sent money when Jason was behind on his mortgage. I had been the daughter who people said was so dependable. In that second, I saw it like a receipt. They did not forget me. They budgeted me. I said over my shoulder, "Sure. 1 more month." Then I walked to my car. I sat there in the dark street with the wipers squeaking and the porch light glowing behind me, and I let the quiet say everything. That night, I realized love in my family was not unconditional. It was billed monthly. If you have ever paid to stay loved, you already know what comes next. When people call you the responsible one, they do not mean it as a compliment. They mean you are the person who pays first and gets thanked last. After that night on the porch, I kept replaying every small choice that had turned me into their personal safety net. The truth is, it started 10 years earlier when Dad lost his job at the shipping yard. He called me voice flat, said he might miss a mortgage payment. I was 23, just out of the National Guard, trying to start my own life. But when your father says he is drowning, you throw the rope. I wired $2,000 that month, then the next, then every month for nearly 2 years. Mom called it temporary help. I called it a duty tax. She told people proudly that her daughter was doing well, working hard, always dependable, but she never said what it cost. I remember the way she said, "You make more anyway. It is your duty." The first time she said that, I thought she meant it as encouragement. By the 5th time, I understood it was law. When Jason decided he wanted to open a coffee shop, I was the first one he called. He said, it is only 80 grand to start. The bank just needs a cosign." I was tired of being the helper, but I also wanted to believe that helping would buy me belonging. I signed the papers. The shop opened. They took a photo for Facebook. Mom posted congratulations to Jason for opening his own business and for helping his little sister get back on her feet after the army. I stared at that caption for a long time. He helped me. That was the first twist of the knife. I told myself it did not matter as long as the payments were on time, but of course, they were not. The calls started after 6 months. Jason's voice light, "Hey Em, can you float the loan for a bit rough season?" I paid because fighting felt heavier than losing. He promised to pay me back when the shop took off. It never did. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store with Mom. The bill was $68. She reached into her purse and froze. Oh no, forgot my card. Without thinking, I handed mine. She smiled like it was choreography. "You're such a blessing," she said, like a walking ATM. The cashier laughed. I did not. I remember how her words landed like a soft slap. At home that night, I checked my account. Another transfer out. Another line of proof that being a blessing just meant being available. The little things added up faster than the big ones. When their internet bill came due, I paid it because the kids needed Wi-Fi for school. Then Mom added her streaming subscriptions under my Amazon Prime. When I tried to cancel, she messaged me, "The boys cried last night when the cartoon would not load. Can you renew?" She sent a crying emoji. I renewed. People talk about emotional abuse like yelling. Mine sounded like, "Please and thank you." Around that time, a neighbor stopped me outside the bakery. She smiled wide and said, "I heard your brother helped you invest in his business. How generous of him." I stood there with a coffee in my hand and said, "Yes, he is quite the helper." That night I looked at the spreadsheet I kept for taxes and realized my family cost me more than rent. The pattern was so clear, it almost made me laugh. Every favor I gave them became a story about their kindness. Every bill I paid turned into their achievement. It was like a trick mirror. You could not tell who was upside down. A few weeks later, I got an email from the phone company. Family plan renewal. I had forgotten Jason was still on my plan. 4 years after he opened his shop. I looked at the numbers and realized I was still paying for his line and his wife's line and even the extra data for their kids. The account said, "Primary user Emily Carter." I stared at that phrase, primary user. That was me. The provider they mocked. It was not the money that stung. It was the way they made me feel like giving was natural while receiving gratitude was awkward. They had turned responsibility into servitude. I started to think maybe that was the point. When you are the one who fixes things, no one wants you to stop. Because if you stop, they have to look at the cracks. The next day, Mom called. She said, "Your brother's coffee shop needs new equipment. Can you just lend him a bit more?" I said, "How much?" She said, "Whatever you can." It was never a question. It was a script. I hung up and stared at the wall. The picture of me in uniform was still there. The caption from years ago read, "Our brave girl serving her country." I wondered why serving them felt harder. I think back now and realize I kept paying, not because I was kind, but because I was afraid of who I would be without their approval. Responsibility had become my leash and their comfort my cage. I was the provider they mocked, the dependable daughter who funded her own rejection. Somewhere between the second loan and the grocery checkout, I stopped being family and became payroll. That realization would sit quietly until Veterans Day, the day they reminded me I was never invited to the table I paid for. The rain had not stopped when I got home that night. I left my jacket on the chair and sat on the couch in the dark. The quiet felt heavier than it should have. Out of habit, I opened my phone. Facebook was glowing a small light, pretending to be comfort. The first post on my feed was from my mother, a photo of the dinner table I had seen through the window. The caption read, "Veterans Day dinner with our real hero Jason, the man who keeps this family strong." I stared at the words until they blurred. The background showed everyone smiling. The empty chair that should have been mine was cropped out neatly. I scrolled through the comments. One said, "What about Emily?" My mother had replied, "She is busy chasing her career." I felt the sting under my ribs. Chasing. Like ambition was a crime. Then Jason's comment appeared below hers. A simple emoji of a dollar sign. It was small, childish, but it said everything. The joke was that my career, the one that had paid for their peace, was greed. I could almost hear his laugh. I did not cry. I did not comment. I just clicked the little blue thumb, the digital way of saying, "I am still polite even when you humiliate me." My hands were trembling. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. It was Veterans Day, a holiday about gratitude. I had worn the uniform, carried the weight, and now I was the punchline in my own family. The heater clicked on and the sound made the room feel lonelier. Hunger crept in. Not real hunger, just habit. I ordered a pizza because cooking felt like too much. When the delivery guy arrived, he looked at me for a second and smiled. "You look familiar," he said. "Did your family used to own that house on Powell Boulevard?" For a moment, I did not know how to answer. I forced a small smile and said, "They still do, kind of." He nodded like he understood and left. I closed the door and leaned against it. That small talk cut deeper than the Facebook post. Everyone in the neighborhood still saw the Carters as one family. They did not see the transactions behind the curtain. The loans, the quiet sacrifices, the humiliation disguised as love. I opened the pizza box and sat on the floor. The smell filled the room, but I could barely taste it. I stared at the old photo frame on the shelf. It was from Christmas, years ago. Dad was smiling, Mom had her arm around Jason, and I was standing at the edge holding a tray. I looked like a guest who forgot to sit down. I whispered to myself I served 6 years for my country. I could not last one dinner in my own home. The words felt too honest. They hung in the air like confession. I kept scrolling through Facebook, unable to stop. Mom had tagged half the family, distant cousins, church friends, everyone who would clap for Jason's promotion. The notifications kept buzzing. I noticed how many times people wrote, "You must be so proud of him." No one mentioned me. I was the invisible line item that made the party possible. The groceries, the decorations, even the gas in their car probably came from something I once paid. Every like on that post felt like another receipt. I thought about calling Mom, maybe confronting her, but I knew the script. She would say, "Oh, honey, you are taking things too seriously. You know we love you." Then she would tell me to stop being sensitive and remind me that Jason was family. That word family had become a weapon. It meant obligation when they said it, not affection. I turned off my phone and sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The sound filled the silence like a clock ticking down to something I could not name. Around midnight, I stood up and went to my desk. I pulled out the folder that held every receipt from the past few years. Tuition payments, utility bills, wire transfers, pages and pages of quiet generosity. Each one felt like evidence in a case I had never filed. My hands shook as I flipped through them. I wondered if they even remembered how many times I had saved them. Probably not. People rarely remember the hands that hold them up. They only remember the hands that let go. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The window was fogged and I could see my reflection faintly. I looked tired, older than 33. My face did not look like someone who was loved. It looked like someone who had been used and taught to smile through it. I whispered to myself, "It is not about the dinner. It is about respect." But respect was something my family spent freely because they never had to earn it. The next morning, I woke up to more notifications. Jason had posted another photo this time of him holding a mug in front of his coffee shop. Caption grateful for family support and second chances. The comments were full of praise. "You deserve it. Hard work pays off. Proud of you." I could not stop staring at that phrase, second chances. I wanted to laugh. The only reason he got a second chance was because I paid for the first. I closed the app and threw my phone onto the couch. I made coffee, but it tasted bitter. Every sip felt like swallowing resentment. I thought about unfollowing them, but that felt like admitting defeat. I had spent years earning their approval. Even now, I still wanted them to see me. That was the worst part. I went to work, kept my head down, smiled at coworkers. No one knew that the woman answering emails and filing reports had spent her holiday being erased by her own family. During lunch, my coworker showed me a picture of her kids making cards for Veterans Day. She said, "You must have had a nice dinner last night." I nodded and said it was fine. The lie rolled out easily. That evening, I came home to a dark apartment. I did not turn on the lights. I sat near the window and listened to the cars outside. I realized that silence had become my only way to fight. Words never worked with them. Money never changed them. But silence, real silence might, not the kind you use to punish, the kind you use to rebuild. I looked at the folder of receipts again and thought, maybe this is where revenge begins quietly. Every favor had a receipt. That was the lesson that took me years to see. I used to believe generosity built love. In my family, it only built expectation. After that Veterans Day humiliation, I started looking back, tracing the small transactions that had drained more than my bank account. There was the time Mom called saying she needed $600 for a medical copay. She said her knee was killing her, and she could not get the appointment without the payment. I sent it that same hour. 2 days later, she posted a photo of a new Coach purse with the caption, "Treating myself." I stared at the picture so long I could almost smell the leather. I told myself maybe it was a gift from Dad, but I knew better. The next month, Jason texted saying the kids' school tuition was overdue. He asked for $1,200 and swore he would pay me back right after his next big sale at the coffee shop. A week later, he uploaded a photo of himself at the Super Bowl with a foam finger and a beer. I zoomed in on the background to make sure it was really him. It was. I remember whispering to no one. He did not even try to hide it. I could almost laugh at how shameless it was. The pattern became impossible to ignore. When their washing machine broke, I sent $2,800 for a house repair. They hired someone to fix it and then sold the old unit online for cash. Mom texted me that same night we made a little extra from the old one. Maybe now we can go out to dinner. There was no maybe about it. They did. I saw the check-in at a restaurant on Jason's wife's Instagram. The caption read, "Family time is priceless." I sat in my apartment reading that and thought, funny, I know exactly what it costs. The numbers piled up like quiet proof. The worst part was how normal it had become. They would call cry, promise, forget, and I would always pay because guilt was cheaper than arguing. I thought if I kept giving, they would one day give back something that felt like belonging. Instead, all I got was silence between transactions. Then came the credit card. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A calm voice said, "Ma'am, this is Chase Bank. We are calling to verify some unusual charges under your account, ending in 7194. I frowned and said, "I only have one card." The woman said, "Actually, it appears a secondary card was issued under your name 4 months ago." I felt my stomach drop. She listed the charges: family trip to Vegas, $3,472. I said slowly, "I have not been to Vegas." She paused and said, Would you like to report this as fraud?" I let out a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. I said, "Oh, it is not fraud. It is just family." There was silence on the line long enough for both of us to understand what I meant. That night, I called Jason. He answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed. I said, "Did you open a credit card using my name?" He said, "Relax, Em, it is just temporary. We had to book fast before the prices went up." I said, "You used my name, my credit." He said, "I will pay it off next month. You know how it is. You make more anyway." The line went dead before I realized I had hung up. My hands were shaking. It was not even about the money anymore. It was the certainty that they knew exactly what they were doing and did not care. Later that evening, I told Ethan, my boyfriend, about it. He was sitting on my couch eating leftover pizza. He listened quietly and then said, "You are the only person I know who can turn financial abuse into a tax deduction." I laughed harder than I should have because the truth in it was unbearable. That was his way of lightening the air, but it stayed heavy. I lay awake that night running through every bill, every transfer, every lie wrapped in a thank you. The next morning, I went to the bank in person. The clerk recognized me from years of deposits and smiled too warmly. I said I need to print all account statements for the last 5 years. She asked if everything was all right. I said, "I just want to see the shape of my mistakes." It took half an hour for the printer to finish. The stack was thick, heavier than I expected. I carried it home like evidence. I spread the pages across my table, then onto the wall. Each one was a moment I had mistaken obligation for love. Medical copay, tuition, repairs, family trip to Vegas. I highlighted the total amounts in red, $79,842. That was the sum of my silence. Looking at it made me feel oddly calm. I picked up a marker and wrote at the top I did not lose $80,000. I bought clarity. It looked almost like art, a mosaic of choices and consequences. For the first time, I saw the full picture of what they had taken. It was not just money, it was self-respect paid in installments. I sat down on the floor staring at the wall and felt something inside me shift from exhaustion to resolve. I realized the only way to win with people who feed on your guilt is to stop serving it. Revenge would not come from rage, it would come from balance. Sometimes the balance you need is not in your bank, it is in your spine. The breaking point did not arrive with noise. It came wrapped in an ordinary Tuesday morning. The office smelled like coffee and printer ink. I was answering emails when the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. I looked up and saw Jason storming in red-faced coat, half-buttoned hair damp from the rain. For a moment, my brain could not match the image of my brother with the man shouting my name in front of my coworkers. "Emily," he yelled loud enough for everyone to stop typing. I stood slowly, my stomach tightening. Jason marched straight to my desk, slammed his hand on it, and hissed, "You are nothing without this family." I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward us. The air went still. My voice came out steady even though my pulse was wild. That is exactly what I am trying to be. For a second, he blinked like he could not process the sentence. Then his face twisted. "You think you can cut us off?" he snapped. "You think that makes you better." I took a breath, kept my tone quiet. It makes me free. My manager appeared from the corner, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Sir, you need to leave," she said. Jason ignored her. "You owe us," he shouted. "You owe Mom. You owe me." The words bounced off the office walls like something rehearsed. I gathered my composure and said, "No, Jason, I paid already. More than enough." He froze long enough for the silence to stretch, and then he turned and stormed out, knocking a chair sideways. The sound echoed long after he was gone. My coworkers looked at me with that awkward pity reserved for someone whose private life just bled into work. I forced a small smile, said, "Sorry about that," and sat down. My hands were trembling, but my breathing was calm. Something inside me had shifted from fear to certainty. The next day, I woke to an email notification from my bank. Subject line, "Suspicious activity." It said Jason Carter attempted to open a new joint account using your social security number. My jaw clenched so hard I could hear it click. I called the bank immediately. After the hold music, a cheerful voice came on. "Ma'am, can I confirm if the applicant is your husband?" I almost laughed. Worse, I said my brother. The woman on the line hesitated, not sure whether to apologize or laugh. She said, "We will freeze all new applications. Would you like to report this as identity theft?" "Yes," I said, and for the first time in my life, the word yes felt like a weapon, not a plea. After the call, I sat in silence staring at the monitor. The emails from work blurred. I opened my drawer and pulled out the folder of receipts again. I printed new statements from the bank. The total debt he owed me sat there in black and white, but the emotional debt was the one I could finally close. I took a red pen and wrote across the last page, "Debt paid in full emotionally." I stared at the words until they sank in. There would be no more guilt payments, no more quiet loans disguised as love. Later that afternoon, my manager came by my desk and asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine, that it was just family drama. She nodded, but her eyes lingered with that mix of empathy and disbelief people get when they realize family can be crueler than strangers. When I got home, the rain had started again, the Portland kind that drizzles without mercy. I stood by the window watching the city blur through streaks of water. The streetlights glowed soft and far away. I pressed my hand to the glass and let the cold seep in. Every drop on the window looked like another moment I had swallowed humiliation instead of speaking. For years, I thought being strong meant staying silent. Now I knew strength sometimes meant walking away. My phone buzzed again. It was Jason. The text read, "You made things worse. Mom is crying. Call me." I put the phone face down on the counter. The message felt smaller than the sound of rain. I poured myself coffee, sat at the table, and opened my laptop. I started closing every joint account, changing every password, unlinking every automatic payment. It felt almost ceremonial, like dismantling a machine that had been feeding on me for years. Each confirmation email pinged softly like a heartbeat, steady and new. I imagined Jason sitting somewhere fuming, unable to access the money he thought was guaranteed. I imagined Mom calling him, telling him to fix it. I imagined the shock when they realized I was not coming back. The thought did not make me cruel, it made me calm. Later that night, I found an old envelope from when Dad was still alive. Inside was a letter he had written before his heart attack. He had thanked me for helping out, for being reliable. But there was one line that hit different. "Do not let responsibility become your chain." I had not understood it then. Now I did. I folded the letter and placed it beside the red mark statement. "Debt paid in full emotionally." I whispered it out loud like a vow. Outside, the rain turned heavier. I opened the window just enough to feel the cold mist hit my face. The air smelled clean new. That was the moment my revenge started, not with fury, but with clarity. I was done being their account. I was done being the reliable one who got erased. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath. The night was quiet, except for rain tapping steady like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. This was the beginning of my freedom and the slow unfolding of their karma. The next morning, I walked into the bank with a calm I did not recognize. The air smelled like disinfectant and paper. The clerk at the counter looked up and smiled politely, asking how she could help. I said, "I need to cancel all linked accounts under my name and remove every secondary user." She typed quickly, her nails tapping a rhythm that matched my pulse. She asked, "Are you sure about closing family accounts too?" I nodded, especially those. She disappeared into the back to get a manager. When he returned, he held a tablet and said, "Miss Carter, before we proceed, we need to verify a few things." As we reviewed each connection, I saw familiar names: Jason Carter, Linda Carter, my mother, my brother. The manager frowned and said, "It appears there is also a joint savings called Family Emergency Fund, $15,000. Primary owner Jason Carter, secondary owner Emily Carter. The deposits came from your account." My stomach clenched. I said, "My account." He turned the screen toward me. There it was. Transfers marked recurring monthly auto debit. The fund was supposedly created by my mother last year for emergencies. The source of every payment was me. The emergency was my generosity. I almost laughed. He asked, "Would you like to dispute ownership?" "Absolutely," I said. The calm in my voice surprised me. I signed the paperwork, then asked for printed copies of every linked account. He nodded and began printing. The sound of the machine was steady, like the ticking of a clock running out on them. When I left the bank, the sky was gray again, but I felt light. On the corner of the street, I stopped to call a lawyer. The number had been sitting in my notes since that night I watched the Loser's story online. Mark Dawson. He picked up with a warm, professional tone. I said, "My name is Emily Carter. You helped a woman named Jolie once. I think I have a family issue similar to hers." He paused, then said quietly, "I remember that case." "What happened?" I told him everything from the loans to the fraudulent card to the hidden fund. He said, "Bring everything." The next day, we met in his office downtown. He flipped through my stack of statements like he had seen this story too many times. He said calmly, "This is financial abuse disguised as duty. We can freeze assets and file identity theft. Do you want to pursue legal recovery?" I said, "I want peace first, money second." He nodded. "Then we start with documentation." That night, I sat on my couch with my laptop open and began the small, quiet acts of revenge that did not need a courtroom. I changed every password, bank accounts, emails, cloud storage, streaming subscriptions, the family plan that had kept Jason connected to my phone bill, the Amazon account my mother used for free shipping. One by one, I clicked Cancel Subscription Confirm. Each click felt like air returning to my lungs. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Jason calling. I ignored it. A text followed. "Why can't I log in to Netflix?" Then another. "The Wi-Fi says, invalid user." I typed back, "Maybe it is family only," and hit send. The satisfaction was quiet but pure. Ethan came by later that evening with takeout. I told him what I had done. He grinned and said, "So you basically repossessed your dignity." I said something like that. I went further. I opened my contacts and found the list of Jason's business associates, people he often borrowed from. I composed a new email. "Hi, this is Emily Carter. If you receive any financial requests from my brother Jason using my name or referencing joint funds, please report it as identity theft. Thank you." I hit send to 20 contacts. It was not revenge through chaos. It was revenge through clarity, quiet justice, the kind that did not destroy but revealed. I knew word would spread. People would whisper. Jason would rage. But this time he could not twist the story because the evidence was numbers, not emotions. Later I sat back watching the notifications of red receipts pop up one by one. Each tiny checkmark felt like another lock clicking shut on a door he could no longer open. Around midnight, Mom called. I let it ring, then sent it to voicemail. The message she left was short. "Emily, why are you doing this? You are tearing the family apart." I stared at the screen. The family had been torn long before I stopped paying for the glue. I deleted the voicemail and closed my eyes. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I realized I was not angry anymore. I was done. For years, I had been financing my own erasure. Now I was the one canceling it. I poured myself a glass of water and raised it slightly toward the empty room like a toast, to endings that sound like freedom. The thing about receipts is they do not lie even when people do. The fallout began quietly like everything else. 2 weeks after I closed the accounts, Kelly called me out of the blue. Her voice trembled, but not from anger. "Emily," she said, "I think something is wrong. I found a bank statement addressed to Jason and there were charges I do not understand." She hesitated, like saying it out loud might break something. "He used your loan money in casinos." My mind went blank. The $80,000 I gave to save his house had turned into poker chips. She sent me pictures of the statements, and there it was, a line of withdrawals from the same account I had once filled out of pity. Vegas, Reno, a transfer to an online betting site. I told her to keep everything. That night, she called again, whispering like he might hear her through the walls. I found more, she said. He even opened a new card with your name on it. That was the moment she stopped defending him and started helping me. The next morning, my phone buzzed with screenshots, bank statements, emails, receipts. She wrote in the family group chat, Jason used Emily's name to open a credit line. That is not family. That is fraud. Silence held for a minute, then exploded. My mother replied, "Stop this right now. You are embarrassing everyone." Jason tried to call, but no one answered. Word spread fast through the cousins and uncles. People started asking questions. The same people who once called him the golden son were now seeing numbers instead of charm. 2 days later, Mom announced a family dinner to fix things. I went, not for reconciliation, but for truth. The house smelled like garlic bread and tension. Everyone sat around the table pretending to be calm. Jason's eyes were bloodshot. When I walked in, he stood up pointing at me. "She is ruining this family," he shouted. "She is trying to destroy us." I stayed by the doorway holding the file of printed statements. "No," I said slowly. "You did that with a signature." The room went silent. Kelly opened her purse and laid out the receipts like cards. Casino withdrawals, credit card approvals, joint accounts. Each one a confession written in ink. My mother's hands trembled. She said, "We can fix this, honey. We just need to talk to the bank." I looked at her and felt the weight of every year I had tried to earn her respect. I smiled faintly and said, "You would need a better credit score first." The room broke into an awkward mix of gasps and a single stifled laugh from one of the cousins. It was not cruel, it was truth wearing humor. For a second, Jason looked like he might throw something, then his shoulders sagged. He sat down, staring at his hands. The rest of dinner was quiet. No one touched the food. I left without saying goodbye. On the drive home, I thought about how humiliation had come full circle. He once blocked me from a dinner I had paid for. Now he sat at his own table, surrounded by evidence of what he had done. Karma does not always arrive loud. Sometimes it just sits across from you with a folder. The fallout spread quickly. Within a week, Jason's company received a notice from the bank about potential fraud. They suspended him pending investigation. By Friday, he was fired. The same co-workers who once praised his ambition now whispered behind closed doors. Mom called crying, saying the house might be seized because she had co-signed one of his loans. I listened quietly. There was no pleasure in her fear, but there was a kind of justice. Actions finally had price tags. Kelly moved out with the kids. She sent me a message, "Thank you for helping me see." I replied, "You helped yourself." A few days later, I received a letter from the bank confirming the closure of the Family Emergency Fund. Balance zero. Attached was a note from the investigator. "Thank you for your cooperation." They never said thank you when I sent money, only when I stopped. That irony felt poetic. The city was gray again when I walked downtown that weekend. The streets smelled of rain and espresso. I passed Jason's old coffee shop. The windows were dark, the sign for lease hanging crooked. I paused long enough to notice the reflection of my own face in the glass. Calm, steady, unrecognizable, from the woman who once begged for belonging. The air felt lighter. At night, I went through the wall of receipts still taped in my apartment. I started peeling them off one by one, folding them into a box. Each sheet no longer proof of pain, but of survival. For years, I had mistaken money for love and silence for peace. Now I understood that real peace begins when the lies end. My mother texted again saying, "Jason is in trouble, you should call him." I typed back, "I did, just not the way you think." Then I turned off my phone and watched the rain streak the window like ink, washing away the old story. Receipts never lie, and neither does consequence. 2 months passed before I saw him again. Winter had turned the city quiet. The streets were lined with bare trees and puddles that reflected the dull gray sky. I was home on a Sunday morning making coffee when the knocking started. hard urgent. I froze for a moment, then walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Jason. His coat was frayed, his eyes hollow. The man who once laughed at me on Veterans Day looked smaller, like the air had been let out of him. I opened the door just enough for the cold to slip in. He swallowed before speaking. "You are all I have left." His voice cracked on the word have. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I tilted my head the same way he had that night months ago when he blocked me from dinner. "This dinner is kind of family only," I said softly and closed the door. I stood there listening to the silence that followed. He did not knock again. I leaned against the door and felt no guilt, just stillness. Sometimes the quiet after a storm is not emptiness. It is balance returning. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived from the courthouse. I assumed it was another form or notice, but when I opened it, my breath caught. The letter stated that as part of the asset liquidation from Jason's fraud case, I was to receive $80,000 in restitution, the same amount I had once given to save him. My hand trembled slightly as I traced the printed numbers. It felt like the universe signing a receipt that said paid back in full. I did not celebrate. I simply sat at my table with the sunlight falling across the papers and whispered, "Thank you." Not to him, to the quiet that had guided me here. Days later, I walked into the Veterans Relief Foundation downtown. The lobby smelled like coffee and soap. I met with a coordinator and handed her a check for $20,000. I asked that it be used for housing grants for homeless veterans and that the donation be made under the name of my father, Harold Carter. She looked up surprised. "Are you sure you want it anonymous?" I nodded. He was the one who taught me that dignity is worth more than applause. She smiled and said, "We will make sure his name lives on the plaque." When I walked outside, the air felt different. The kind of clean cold that stings your lungs and wakes you up. I stood there for a while watching the city move and thought about how justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about restoring what was lost inside you. Later that week, I received a text from Kelly. She said the kids are doing better. We found a small house up north. "Thank you for everything." I replied, "Tell them to build a snowman for me." She sent back a photo that night of 2 boys laughing in the snow. The picture glowed on my screen like proof that some things can heal without apology. I printed it and pinned it to my wall where the receipts used to hang. The contrast made me smile. My mother called once after that. Her voice was weary. She said, "Your brother is struggling. He needs help." I took a deep breath and answered calmly, "Maybe this is what help looks like. Teaching him consequences." She sighed and said, "You have changed." I said I finally stopped paying for everyone else's mistakes. The line went quiet before she hung up. I felt no anger, just release. The next morning, I went through the last of the boxes in my apartment. Inside one was the apple pie tin from that Veterans Day night. I had kept it without realizing why. I cleaned it, polished the edges, and donated it to a community bake sale for the shelter. It felt symbolic, returning something once ruined into something useful. That evening, I drove past my parents' street. Their house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch light still glowed, but it no longer felt like rejection. It looked like an old stage set after the play was over. I did not stop. I kept driving until I reached the overlook above the city. From there, the lights looked soft and forgiving. I rolled down the window and let the cold air brush against my face. The same air that once carried humiliation now carried peace. I whispered, "They ignored me on Veterans Day, but now every day feels like Independence Day." The words were not revenge, they were closure. Below the city hummed, and somewhere out there, Jason was facing the weight of his own choices. I did not wish him pain. I wished him awareness. That was enough. As I sat there, I realized freedom was never about walking away. It was about walking back to yourself. I turned the key and the car engine started softly. The headlights cut through the dark road ahead. I smiled because for the first time the road felt entirely mine. quiet justice, silent revenge, emotional resilience, dignity over money, truth and closure, standing up for yourself, reclaiming respect, lesson in betrayal, justice without hate, revenge through truth,